Welcome to Psychedelics and Transpersonal Coaching, a hot topic today with conversation partner David Luke. All right, David and I will be exploring this trending topic of psychedelics and transpersonal coaching and exploring how this holistic and integrative form of coaching might have value to offer in pre-psychedelic preparation and post-psychedelic integration. My name is Jevon Dangeli. I'm the Transpersonal Coaching Psychology course leader at Aleph Trust. I thought it would be useful, perhaps enjoyable, if we could take a few breaths together just to ease ourselves into this shared space, perhaps cultivating a sense of communitas between us. And then we'll get on into the conversation. So if you'd be so kind, and if you're willing, join us in taking a few breaths. I'd like to invite us to each take an inspiration through the nose. Let that beautiful breath turn and release slowly out from the mouth. Another inspiration through the nose. Release and relax with that long, slow out breath. And just one more breath together, all the way in and all the way out, allowing your awareness to go out with the breath, to explore the space in which we're all connected, the space in which we come together today to explore this fascinating topic. Thank you. So let me introduce our conversation partner. Dr. David Luke is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Greenwich, honorary senior lecturer of the Center of Psychedelic Research, Imperial College London, and lecturer at Aleph Trust. His research focuses on transpersonal experiences, anomalous phenomena, and altered states of consciousness, especially via psychedelics. Having published more than 100 papers in this area, including 10 books, and most recently, Other Worlds, Psychedelics and Exceptional Human Experience. When he's not running clinical drug trials with LSD, conducting DMT field experiments, or observing apparent weather control with Mexican shamans, he directs the Ecology, Cosmos, and Consciousness Salon, and is a co-founder and director of Breaking Convention, an international conference on psychedelic consciousness. And that, I might add, is his short biography. David, it's good to have you with us. Hello.
Thank you so much, Jevon. That was a wonderful introduction, and so nice to be here and see this kind of cross-pollination of the two professional certificate programs and more beyond, I'm sure. But it's nice to see a mix of both of our students in here.
Yeah, indeed. It's been a long time in the waiting to have you come and share your expertise with us today. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I'd like to introduce transpersonal coaching in relation to psychedelics very briefly, and then I'll get into an initial question 2 or 3 to get our conversation started. We'll go from there. All right. So transpersonal coaches are trained to work pragmatically with abstract, symbolic, and spiritual phenomena. This unique skill set enables coaches to meet clients where they are, no matter where they are or what they experience, while helping those clients to process and make sense of those experiences so that integration can be achieved. Psychedelic experiences may be profound, meaningful, and potentially transformative, but they may also be confusing for some people. For coaching in the psychedelic space to remain safe, client-centered, and beneficial, coaches need to know what to expect, where and how coaching can be helpful or not, and where the line is between coaching and psychedelic-assisted therapy. So David, to my first question, if I may, what are the characteristics of psychedelic phenomena?
So, and I guess, thank you, Jevon. I guess this applies equally to all altered states. And I like to think of psychedelics just as a particular type of altered state. And of course, each psychedelic can induce a different altered state as well. But they are generally very profound and powerful types of altered states. But I don't think you can't already achieve a lot of these phenomena in other states. So I'm just going to kind of frame it like that, first of all. And as with all altered states of consciousness of a profound nature that may potentially lead to transpersonal experiences, there is a change in all dimensions and aspects of your consciousness, perhaps your sense of self, your sense of your body, your sense of time and space, your thoughts, your cognitions, your perceptions, your sense of how meaningful things are, and your emotions. All of these things can change in profound ways. And the upshot of that is that there may be multiple effects that can ensue from one of these experiences, not least when people have transpersonal experiences, which may then lead to kind of profound transformations of personality and direction and motivation and mental health status, etc. So that would kind of how I'd frame it in a condensed format anyway.
Thank you, David. That's a great start to the conversation. And you pointed to mental health, personality shifts at the level of identity, and deep changes that promote transformation. So if a psychedelic or spiritual experience, for that matter, might bring about that degree of shift in consciousness, I'm wondering then, how can coaching or any other practice for that matter be put to service in support of processing this new frame of reference, this new experience of self, and helping people to make sense of those experiences, embody them, and integrate them into life?
Yeah, well, it certainly can. I think there's certainly room for coaching in this equation, and I think the point is that these experiences can be so profound that they require often guidance. I mean, people often do have psychedelic experiences on their own and with no kind of guidance, but I think it's very useful to have handrails when you're diving off the deep end into the far reaches in the cosmos of your own mind. And that could be psychotherapy or counseling or coaching or whatever it could be. You know, there's many different forms and formats, and I think they all bring something slightly different to the table and probably all overlap. But the kind of received wisdom as regards to psychedelic experiences, and again, you can apply this maybe to all profound altered states, is that to maximize the benefits and reduce the risks of psychological harm from those experiences, you need to pay attention to certain factors, such as preparation beforehand, obviously, the setting during the experience, which perhaps applies less to coaching here, and then the period of integration afterwards as well. And I think the coaching here probably has its best applications in bookending these profound experiences, or potentially profound experiences, in guiding the person through into the journey, and then what happens after the journey on the other side. What happens during the journey is usually a very inner and personal experience, and that usually requires sitters, people just to make the person feel safe and secure, but it's not usually very directed, the experiences, or perhaps they shouldn't be very directed, unless of course you're with a shaman or something like that. So I think there's a kind of really useful role here for bookending these experiences. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how coaching may be similar and different to the idea of psychotherapy or psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and integration. I mean, I have my own thoughts as well, of course, and so I'll maybe just throw those out now. And that is because these experiences can be so profoundly intense and also then challenging, that they can often bring up a lot of disturbing or uncomfortable autobiographical material. So if people have trauma, or a lot of unattended issues, or maybe haven't done a lot of the work to inspect the notion of their own consciousness and their identity and their projections and drives and all the rest of it, then they may well be confronted with a lot of that material that emerges in a kind of powerful psychedelic experience. And I think in those situations that may often be very challenging, and it may be that could be suitable for gleaning something useful in a coaching environment, but that may potentially be more suited to some kind of direct psychotherapy. Whereas perhaps coaching might better apply to those people who either A, don't have so much, and this is quite a rare one to find, people don't have any kind of psychological baggage that they're looking around that they haven't inspected or are kind of traumatized by, or that they've already done some of this kind of psychonautic legwork, and they may be less likely to be hijacked by their own unconscious psychological material lurking in the sewers of their mind, and are better able to utilize it in a prospective way to find some direction in life into the future, rather than dealing with the traumas of the past. So that would be my kind of guess as to where coaching would be more beneficial perhaps than psychotherapy. But of course, I think there's probably some kind of overlapping territory in there as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
David, thank you. Really useful insights here. And it reminds me of what a gentleman once explained to me, and he was a psychedelic facilitator. What he said to me, and this goes back years and years ago, is that he's able to take people to the other end of the universe and back again. And when they come back, they've still got their problems. And for preparation, what I guess the best skill is that we can share is helping people who are considering the psychedelic experience to enter into it in that open frame of reference with the skill available to them, and my hands are gesturing to maintain that open frame of reference instead of becoming fixated on this or that type of detail that might pull them into an experience where they may feel overwhelmed. It might be too intense, may take them down, who knows where it's going to lead, and that might be too much for them to handle. So the skill of being able to be present in the body, in the space, here and now, the simultaneous awareness and the skill to be able to be embodied and present in this time, space, reality, regardless of what one experiences. And that, again, I suppose the intensity of the experience will really be the determiner there, but the skill has proven to be really helpful as transpersonal coaches, enabling people to maintain an embodied open awareness as a precursor to the psychedelic experience is a skill set that we're able to contribute. Post-psychedelic, on the other end of the bookshelf, it's all about integration, and there we have models that enable the person to process the experience in the frame of open awareness again, but to look at the 5 domains of experience: the body, mental, cognition, the emotional experience, the relationships, and the spiritual experience, and to look at how their psychedelic encounter can be understood through those 5 lenses and integrated into those 5 domains of life. So an integrative practice is then suggested. and how to approach that integrative practice effectively based on what that person has reported from their psychedelic experience. That would be that element of integration that we find useful. And another one is coming together in community to create a safe space to talk about and process the experience with like-minded people, perhaps those that have gone through similar experiences or not. But this leads to my next question. As transpersonal coaches or spiritual practitioners, if we've had experiences of a spiritual nature that have brought about that deep sense of interconnectedness with one and all, that deep sense of unity in which we know through direct experience that we are of the same essence and unique expressions of it. In other words, an embodied realization of our interconnectedness. If this has been brought about through a spiritual practice, but not through a psychedelic practice, are we sufficiently equipped to work with those who are considering the psychedelic experience and in supporting them through their integration?
This is a very interesting question and a bit of a hot button topic, actually, amongst people within the existing psychedelic community. There are some concerns around this, and people are of different opinions. I think a lot of people who have been around in the psychedelic community for a while and have the psychedelic experience are mostly of the opinion that, okay, it might not be essential, but it really does help to have some prior psychedelic experience, whether or not you have experience with some kind of spiritual practice or not. Although I'd say most people don't consider this caveat of having some kind of ongoing embodied spiritual practice. I think that's quite key. I think a lot of the concern currently in the field comes from, for instance, this kind of increasing commercial interest in developing psychedelics as medicines. And a lot of those companies who are doing that, they are using psychotherapists and counselors who have no prior experience to sit and guide people through their psychedelic experiences. And this has kind of got the hackles up on a lot of people in the community. Now, for sure, I think people in the community would feel much better about it if these people had some kind of prior or ongoing spiritual embodied practice, and maybe even prior non-psychedelic transpersonal or mystical or unitive experiences. But the concern is that it's a couple of things, I think. And one is how can they kind of relate well to a person who's having one of these experiences? Now, you may have all the appropriate tools and skills in your kind of pharmacopoeia, let's say, of psychological interventions and practices to help a person ordinarily, but there is a missing gulf potentially here of people in that how can they actually relate on a deeper level if they have no prior experience? It's kind of like an initiation rite in a way, in that you imagine the person there and they're about to smoke toad venom or DMT or have a high dose of mushrooms, and it's a very, really big experience that they're about to partake in, and they require a lot of trust in that. And then they turn to their guide or therapist or coach and say, and have you tried it? And they go, oh no, I haven't tried it, but it's good, it'll be fine. That takes I mean, I think that there's an issue of trust and rapport here, which could be enhanced. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm of the opinion that people can still be good coaches, guides, sitters, therapists for people having psychedelic experiences if they don't have their own psychedelic experience. But that I think the majority of people having the experience would feel more secure and have a better rapport if the person they're working with has already had the experience. And then the other thing is that if they have no concept of the transpersonal realms that these psychedelic experiences very often take people to, i.e. if they are coming from a more kind of mainstream common or garden psychotherapeutic coaching background, then they may have difficulty relating to the experiences that emerge afterwards. And the danger is that people just get othered, and they think they've kind of maybe lost their mind or something like that, or that they hear their stories, but they're kind of inside they're shaking their head with skepticism, and I think that there's also an issue there about trust and misunderstanding the clients. But if they have transpersonal experience and training and background, I think that goes a long way, because I think psychedelic experiences very much fall under this rubric, this heading of the transpersonal, and that could be through any other altered state or spontaneous occurrence. So I'd feel more secure about that. I'd prefer that they were a transpersonal coach, steeped in the transpersonal, than a CBT psychotherapist or something like that, to be honest with you, that was guiding somebody through an experience.
David, thank you for addressing this crucial point. I feel it's important to tease apart the role of transpersonal coaching being the two ends of that bookshelf, pre and post psychedelic experience, and the sitter who holds space throughout the experience. And although a number of people who are facilitators and sitters come to learn transpersonal coaching, their primary reason is to offer that support structure pre and post experience in addition to sitting. So I want to trust that the organizations that are training sitters and facilitators are doing their work thoroughly. In transpersonal coaching, we are not training these coaches to be sitters or facilitators for sessions. Although I think there are many overlaps in some of these transpersonal coaching skills, in particular, using applied open awareness as the means to hold space for whatever arises can probably be applied in that facilitating, sitting context very well. But back to this, I just want to tease apart transpersonal coaches in service to preparation and integration, but not the sitting and facilitating as such. And as transpersonal coaches, having that transpersonal perspective and being able to relate to any and all types of, let's just call it spiritual phenomena that may encompass psychedelic phenomena. Now, I want to also respect the sacred plants, and that there may very well be exquisite phenomena that arise through the use of a specific compound, whether of natural or synthetic origin, and that the qualities of that experience may very well be unique and cannot be found in any form of meditation or spontaneous spiritual awakening. But you've highlighted here, which I appreciate, the value of having that transpersonal lens, so that whatever the client then presents, I was engulfed by this plant and it swallowed me whole. And when I came out the other end, I found myself in another universe. And this is what I experienced there. And now I'm trying to make sense of that in my day-to-day life at home and at work. A transpersonal coach is able to be there with that client as they're sharing that experience in all of the qualities of their phenomena and the experience as it's unfolded. And I'm even suggesting that the transpersonal coach is able to meet them there without having had the direct experience that they've had. Maybe they've had psychedelic experiences, but it wasn't that compound. So where do we draw the line? Do they have to have had psychedelic experience in addition to spiritual experiences? Do they have to have had psychedelic experiences with each and every compound? And I'm not talking about sitters and facilitators. I'm talking about coaches for pre and post. So just trying to tease apart these specificities here.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry for kind of conflating some of the different roles there. I was kind of more looking to the point of, you know, in the experience and relating it. So I think that applies less obviously to transpersonal coaches. And I think certainly in the preparation, but there's kind of like, how well can you prepare people for transpersonal experiences or spiritual experiences? That remains questionable. I mean, to some extent, but I think, you know, what's important for me is in the relating and understanding of the experiences, you know, after the fact, how do we help people integrate them? And, you know, there's a history of the kind of pathologization and demonization of these experiences. And if you're not well versed in them, then you could very easily just cast them aside, you know, or judge them or whatever it may be. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think that the transpersonal coaches have a great role here, not least in that they are well versed in the transpersonal realms, and I think that's key. And as to them having an experience, you know, I think not necessarily. I think the interesting thing is the material that arises during those psychedelic experiences is often so deeply mythological and symbolic, that lends itself well to this process of you know, unpacking and meaning making and finding the story and the direction and the insight and the intuition that transpersonal coaches, I assume and hope, are kind of trained to deal with. And I think that's the important thing. But yeah, I think that having the kind of the scope of the transpersonal is really key as much as anything. And if they happen to have psychedelic experience, then all the better. And it needn't be with that particular psychedelic substance. But I think they should probably be at least educated, you know, they have some, maybe do my course, to have some insight into the variety and nature of these psychedelic experiences and different psychedelics.
I do have one follow-up there, which is, what is the nature of using psychedelics for problem solving? Is it common that people will turn to the psychedelic to address issues in everyday life, conflicts in their relationship, performance issues, anxiety, stress, burnout, and so forth?
People do come to these experiences with an intention to find solutions or gain insight, and even if they don't, they often may come out with those kind of answers anyway. But in the research, certainly there has been a resurgence of interest in work looking into kind of creative problem solving with psychedelics, particularly amongst tech and science professionals, but people in all kinds of different career paths. And I think this is could be very closely aligned to a kind of transpersonal coaching. And often people come out with very clear answers, and they could be very specific. You know, it could be, how do I make sense of 3 years of geological survey data that I've been collecting, which it doesn't kind of fit any one particular theory, and they have these kind of deep dives into altered states. And quite literally in this one, in one case, they kind of dove down to the bottom of the ocean, and they saw their kind of several million years worth of kind of data on tectonic plates all kind of come together in a coherent way that they could apprehend and comprehend, and then bring back with some insight about the nature of that. So that's a very kind of for very specific technical questions, as well as just, you know, life direction, insight, meaning, purpose, and those kinds of things, you know, as well as dealing with, you know, being reactive to stress and depression and all those things as well.
Yeah, indeed. And I think if the experience can not only provide an insight, but the means to implement that insight, then that is indeed a profound experience. But if it just provides that broader perspective and the insight, but perhaps the means of application doesn't become apparent through the experience itself, that's indeed where coaching can be of tremendous value to help those people to then take insight and move it forward into your life in a productive, effective, and ethical way. So that's where we see tremendous scope for the value of transpersonal coaching specifically. And I do want to emphasize transpersonal coaching because this is a special kind of breed of coaches who are trained to relate to those qualities of insight, experiences, as opposed to, as you pointed out earlier, CBT, or in our context, conventional, traditional coaches who just work in that cognitive, behavioral level and don't really appreciate the value of expansive states of consciousness in this way.
There's a question from Zoe who says that she's an accredited and qualified coach and she's considering to offer psychedelic facilitation. And she says she can draw on her own experience in that field, yet she feels that it's a potentially explosive outcome. And her question is if there's a specific education that a coach can engage in or undertake to have more readiness for this type of coaching.
At Aleph Trust, we teach a specific transpersonal coaching model and coaching procedure that respects and works with the transpersonal. And so it's an integral part of our entire approach to coaching, which makes it relatively unique. And having explored and engaged in more conventional types of coaching, as I was mentioning just a bit before, they don't really, they're not as far reaching, if I could just put it simply. And so conventional coaching and psychedelic experiences, they seem like a universe apart. And it might be quite difficult to kind of reconcile how traditional goal setting approaches from conventional coaching methods and working with psychedelic phenomena can be complementary in this way. So it does require a very specific coaching approach, which is what our transpersonal coaching model is all about.
If I can add something to that as well, Jevon, I think Zoe was also saying specifically about psychedelic facilitation, and this I've already made the mistake of conflating these a little bit, but in that context, yeah, how would somebody trained in transpersonal coaching approach the actual facilitation of the actual acute experience? And it's useful that you, as you say, you have some experience of your own, which is good, but yeah, in terms, maybe transpersonal coaching itself doesn't train you directly for facilitating experience. I think transpersonal coaches could be very good facilitators, but I think that there probably is a requirement, or there is some use and benefit to have some better experience of how to guide people through the actual experience. And I say guide, it's in the kind of loosest sense, guide. If things go well, there's very little intervention other than hand holding. But you know, if people are having challenging experiences, then that, you know, there is a need to have some sense of how to deal with those. And they do occasionally happen. And I think it would be useful or wise to get some additional experience there if you're looking to go beyond just the coaching, you know, the book ending, so to speak, and looking to facilitate experiences as well. And of course, there are specific training courses out there. And also, you know, there's other means of getting experience, such as perhaps volunteering for an organization like PsyCare, which I very much encourage my students to do, who are a kind of festival psychedelic welfare organization. And they go around to festivals when people are having, you know, challenging experiences. Usually they've often taken too much or in the wrong context or something like that, and they need a bit of support. I think that can be really useful, diving in at the deep end of what it looks like when people have very difficult experiences, and that, you know, like the kind of in the kind of psychedelic front lines, if you like, and that can be very useful then, skills and applications for helping people guide through what should ordinarily be less challenging, although, you know, there's something to be said for the challenge. That's where a lot of the juice comes out, so to speak. I hope that answers that question a little bit additionally.
Yes, I'm just jumping in to say thank you very much. I appreciate it. And what has come to my mind is coaching is very unregulated. Yes, you can get ICF accredited, and that's where I think you can go onto Udemy and get £15 and kind of deem yourself as a coach. And not that I feel that education is always the main body of it, because experience and wealth and knowledge and wisdom comes into coaching as well. But I have that concern, because I've had experiences myself as a seeker that's tripped out badly and could have been in a really awful situation. Fortunately, I wasn't, but it scared me for many years to even then try something again. But I did go into it with different mindset. And so I wonder if there's a space and place to lead in a process which is a coach that isn't necessarily transpersonal, understanding, meeting the individual where they are. Because most people that come for coaching might say that this is the area they want to work on, but it's seldom that area. It's usually something that's not spoken about or beyond the driving behavior or limiting decisions, beliefs, etc. So maybe there's a lead-in perspective which I could consider, and people like me, and then working with a transpersonal coach to then deepen that experience to kind of help the integration part of it. So maybe that's another way of packaging, because I really feel that this is quite something that's very serious and we shouldn't take lightly.
No, absolutely. I mean, I very much see, I mean, I like this idea of partnering. I very much see a role potentially for, it'd be great to see, I don't know, clinics or retreat centers where they have transpersonal coaches. They also have a psychiatrist. Maybe they're probably quite useless in this regard, but, or a psychotherapist, and or, you know, there could be dedicated roles of sitters. But I think people could very much benefit from this multiplicity of roles and different skill sets in guidance, and I'd like to see this kind of better integrated. And I think some centers are already beginning to explore this or integrate these different roles into their practices.
Thank you.
Yes, this interdisciplinary approach seems to be very sensible. And of course, no one coach, or perhaps no one sitter or psychotherapist or psychiatrist for that matter, is going to have all of the answers for an individual and their rising needs. So I can imagine that we need to work together as a team. And therein also lies value in post-session integration, as I understand it, because coming together with a group of people that can relate to those qualities of experiences, who can collectively hold space for an individual in that supervision, participatory space, is a resource not to be undervalued, I think. And it's for this reason that we provide group supervision sessions on a monthly basis for the coaches who are out there holding space for clients who are having these types of experiences, as a means to resource and support the coaches, which I think Rebecca starts to answer your questions a little bit. So the supervision is an important factor. And Rebecca wrote at the end of the MSc, she's hoping to offer psychedelic integration therapy. So will this be enough alongside various medicine experience? How is it regulated to keep the client safe? Being your top priority, which I think is a good priority to have with that interest. Well, the coaching course at Aleph Trust is approved by the International Association of Coaches, Therapists, and Mentors. Unlike ICF, IACTM, this other one is open to the transpersonal and recognizes and values transpersonal applications in coaching and therapy. So the resources they provide are geared toward supporting transpersonal practitioners across the board. And so we lean into that accreditation and the resources which it offers. We come together in these supervision circles, as I was just suggesting, plus throughout the program, you're learning the skills to hold space, and that quality of space holding can be used as a sitter, to the best of my knowledge, but its greatest value is in preparation and post-psychedelic integration.
How is integration therapy, psychedelic integration, regulated? And well, currently it isn't regulated. And in fact, you know, the world of psychotherapy is also somewhat unregulated too. You know, in the UK, there's no kind of conventional system globally either. But I mean, so I can speak a little bit to the situation in the UK, in that there are professional bodies which will give you that support. You know, they can, you can get insurance and professional support and all the rest of it, but anybody can call themselves a therapist. You know, it's not a protected title in the same way that a psychologist is, for instance. And so that's just the psychotherapy, let alone what happens with psychedelic integration therapy. There are now kind of bodies starting to emerge that are hoping to kind of offer standardization, regulation, oversight, ethics, etc. Particularly, but you know, this is still in a kind of gray area anyway, because it's not a licensed practice or a legal practice in most countries currently, although it's kind of moving in that direction. So it's kind of hard to have a regulation around a practice which is still in this kind of legal and medical gray area currently. However, in places like Oregon in the States, where they recently moved to legalize psilocybin so that people can then get access to it for therapy, or even not necessarily just for therapy, there are now groups of people moving and kind of regulating and saying, like, what are the kind of standards we need to have in place, and et cetera, and et cetera. And my guess is that we have to see how that emerges. They're still in the process of doing that. And my guess is that in a lot of countries, they will probably require for overground psychedelic treatment to be kind of administered by trained psychotherapists, i.e. the ones that are kind of registered with organizations like the BACP in the UK, for instance. But that doesn't mean that they can't necessarily also work alongside coaches as well, and so on. But we're not really at that point yet. And organizations like Mind in Europe are looking to have like two-tiered system, whereby people coming in for psychedelic treatment, you know, should probably have a psychotherapist, trained psychotherapist, integration psychotherapist, and yet then there could be a next level of, they're the ones who maybe kind of guide them through the actual experience, but then there could be a next level of kind of experienced coaches or integration coaches or whatever it might be, you know, but not specifically qualified psychotherapists. But that's a long-winded way of saying currently there is absolutely no regulation. And there's also a lack of regulation just more generally around psychotherapy anyway, in most countries, particularly in the UK.
What I've really appreciated was the way that you've contextualized the psychedelic experience and the difference between sitting in the active experience and the integration of the experience and the preparation of experience, and how those are different roles. But what I also appreciate, what Jevon has explained, was perhaps the unique nature of transpersonal coaching is ideally suited perhaps to that, the bookends of that process. It's different from conventional coaching, isn't it? It's different from conventional psychotherapy as well. But that's not my question. My question is this. In terms of receptivity, how much of a role does that play in the psychedelic experience? I have a number of clients and patients whom I think would really benefit from that type of experience. But culturally, it's difficult for them to expect because they come from a sort of conservative cultural background. To what extent can one sort of try and recommend this strongly or even push it to them? Or is that lack of receptivity going to make this experience either unproductive or actually harmful?
Right. Super interesting question, Henny. I think that was directed at me, but I mean, maybe Jevon can jump in as well. Yeah, and I think you may actually be surprised. I think it has a lot to do with the cultural climate, and that's different in different parts of the world, of course. It may be a bit different in South Africa, say, than in the UK. But, you know, we've recently just crossed the tipping point in the UK. There was a recent YouGov poll, like kind of random national survey, and they found that the majority of the UK population are in favor of discussions around drug policy reform for psilocybin psychotherapy. Okay, so that's, we've kind of shifted the dial now, where there's been such enough positive media and kind of word of mouth and explosion of research and so on, that it's kind of, yeah, it's the kind of moral minority now rather than the majority have the kind of objections to this kind of stuff. And so I think this receptivity is generally changing. And I very often come across people who might well have been in the very conservative camp around these kind of issues, and then are actually very, very intrigued by them. So I give lots of public lectures, and the audience is often, you know, just the lay public, and the majority of people in those audiences have not taken psychedelics, and they've come from all walks of life. So I think it's always okay to kind of offer it out there and maybe suggest it, and see how they respond, I guess. I mean, ultimately, it's down to that individual and their own choice. We're not implying that you're going to kind of force feed them magic mushrooms or anything, but that you can just test the waters and see how receptive they are to it. And I think you might be surprised that even people who are kind of politically or kind of psychologically conservative may still be open to the idea of psychedelics, and increasingly so. I think, you know, the cork's out of the genie's bottle, so to speak, as currently and culturally speaking.
Great question, Henny, and brilliant response, David. Thank you. And, you know, since the cork is out and the research is being published, you were speaking earlier to what's happening overground, but because of this knowledge and interest, what's happening underground is also growing. And there are these mycelial developments around the globe. And I think for as long as this interest continues to expand in this way, interest and the need for our work in I'm thinking specifically about integration now, is going to continue, if I may extend this metaphor, mushrooming out any more into the world. So the demand for us to do this work and to do it in the right way, ethically, whether that means we are officially registered or not, still doing it in the ethical, effective, appropriate way is going to, that demand is increasing. We're noticing that, those of us that are working in the professional transpersonal field. A lot of my clients these days are those that have had psychedelic experiences and are now wanting to explore that further in the coaching container. So there are some other great questions we haven't yet attended to. I will come to Jules. We say that some of the most important qualities of the coach is that they have an awareness and understanding of spiritual emergence and spiritual crisis, which is what the psychedelic experience is likely to be a catalyst for. And then the coach is also committed to having their own ongoing spiritual practice for preparation and integration. David, can we hand that one over to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'm glad that was kind of raised. It's a testament to the good educational understanding of your students. I presume this is one of your students, but you know, these ideas of spiritual emergence and spiritual crisis, I think, are really key, because often that can arise. I mean, they can often arise spontaneously anyway, but of course psychedelics can be catalysts, very much so, for these kinds of experiences, particularly if people are coming from a non-spiritual perspective, i.e. that they're not in tune with a kind of spiritual side of themselves. And I think the literature and the understanding around the idea and concepts of spiritual emergence are key and very useful here. Of course, you know, Christina and Stan Grof were some of the key movers in the area of the idea of spiritual emergence, and they were coming very much from a kind of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy perspective. And David Lukoff, no relation, that's not my American alter ego or anything, but David Lukoff, the clinical psychologist who kind of got spiritual emergence in the diagnostic and statistical manual, you know, his own experiences were precipitated by his use of LSD. So very often these psychedelics can lead to these kinds of spiritual crises or emergencies. And I think it's useful, very useful, to be aware of that kind of system of knowledge and how these experiences emerge and transpire. And one of the things I think we see often, and there hasn't been enough research done on this yet, but I'm part of a research team where we're looking into how people deal with challenging psychedelic experiences, because it's been somewhat overlooked to some extent. And I think a lot of those challenging psychedelic experiences emerge from ontological shock, that people are not necessarily prepared, and how can you be, for the profound challenges to your worldview about, you know, the nature of reality, the spirit, self, soul, all of these things, you know. If you have an experience of a profoundly mystical or spiritual nature, it can completely clash with your prior worldview, and leading to a kind of great deal of confusion, cognitive dissonance, you know, thinking that you're possibly going mad, or on the opposite end of the scale, you know, can it lead to megalomania? And I think, you know, so there is a lot of potential pitfalls and hazards and challenges that can emerge from these spiritual emergencies. And I think it really is useful to have a good grasp of that terrain. And again, my go-to on this is this the exceptional human experience process model and map, which has a really nice mapped out kind of course of evolution of how people tend to respond to these kinds of deep spiritual emergencies or ontologically challenging and shocking experiences. But I'm glad you raised that, and I think it's really key and vital.
What's your thought, David, on holotropic breathwork as an alternative to psychedelic experience? Question from Zoe.
Nice. Well, as an alternative, yes, I think it can be a useful alternative. That is different. It can also lead to very profound altered states of consciousness. I mean, what else we'll say is it's a very good alternative in many respects, because A, it's completely legal so far. You know, we'd be hard pushed to make breathing illegal at any point soon, although with some governments it could be considered. And that it's also, you're in control of the dosage as well. You know, you can just stop breathing at any, well, not stop breathing, but stop, you know, over breathing, if you like, at any point in time, and then, you know, the effects will subside. It's not like you're committed to, you know, 4 or 8 hours of psychedelic intensity, or even 36 if you take something like iboga. With breath work, is once you stop the kind of over breathing process, you kind of gradually drift back to baseline. So it's very legal. It's also very safe, as far as we're aware, at least physiologically. There's some research showed that of 10,000 breathwork sessions, there were no physiological concerns. But although they may bring up lots of the usual challenging psychological material that we may encounter in altered states. How it differs to psychedelic experiences, I would say, is that breathwork tends to bring up more kind of emotional, autobiographical kind of material. It has a great, you know, cathartic value as well. There can be a lot of release you can get from these, from doing breathwork. But it doesn't tend to take you to quite the same kind of cosmic encounter experiences you may get with psychedelics. And, you know, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. It's just how they may differ. But I think for dealing with the emotional stuff, you know, dealing with issues around trauma, etc., I think that breathwork can be extremely useful. And I think it also can go very well alongside psychedelic experiences, not necessarily doing them at the same time, although that is one option. But for instance, in a study we ran giving LSD to scientists for the first time is we gave them a breathwork session the day before, as much as anything to prepare them for the experience, to give them an opportunity to have a guided altered state of consciousness. It was also to help us build rapport with the participants as well ahead of the more intense psychedelic experience. It also had the added benefit of relaxing them as well, so they were able to have this kind of deep, profound, kind of cathartic, relaxing experience. Actually, they didn't tend to have a cathartic experience, a lot of them, but they were very relaxed afterwards, and that made them feel more able and prepared to go into a psychedelic experience as well. So I think, breath work can be a brilliant way of just taking people gently through increasing depth of altered states prior to having psychedelic experiences. So I think there's lots of uses for breath work, and even as a replacement for those people who really don't want to do psychedelics as well.
Thanks for that, David. Yeah, indeed. And of course, the question was about holotropic breath work. And just to be clear, there are many other breathing techniques in addition to the holotropic breath work that Stan and Christina developed a long time ago when their experiments with LSD became illegal. And these days, we're aware of many others, and others that even preceded holotropic, to be considered. And David, I appreciate how you've framed it as a preparation to the breathwork sessions, to develop rapport, sense of connection, and what we in transpersonal coaching might consider cultivating the fertile ground in consciousness to prepare for the experience, opening the aperture of awareness, getting ready for that larger spectrum of experience. And so we take that approach as well. At the start of most transpersonal coaching sessions, the coach and clients sit together and enter into open awareness together. The coach goes there with the client, and the coaching session happens in that state and perspective of open awareness. And that's the very means or channel through which we enter into the space where transpersonal phenomena can be accessed. And if the session is in service to the integration of psychedelic experiences, then we've got a big step in toward that experience. It becomes accessible and processable, if that's a word, within the coaching context. So we see tremendous value, whether through breathwork or other means, to utilize such techniques. Please.
Hi, David. I'm just wondering, in terms of the dangers of psychedelics, I know everyone is different, but would you ever recommend that someone doesn't engage with psychedelics, perhaps someone who has a history of psychosis or schizophrenia? What would you say about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I didn't really put in my kind of caveats either. So I'm glad you brought this up about, the potential. I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about the challenges, and that there may be psychological challenges, but there may be, I don't think psychedelics are necessarily suited to everybody. Certainly, those people who don't want to try it shouldn't feel obliged to have to try it. But also I think there's some people who might want to try it, but might not be suited to it. And so currently, within psychedelic research and a lot of the research centers, they tend to screen out people with first-degree relatives who have a history of psychosis, or individuals themselves with a history of psychosis. Now, we don't necessarily know what the risks are. In fact, actually, that's just kind of done as a matter of course and as a kind of, risk reduction process. It would be really good to see some solid research on how risky it genuinely is for people with relatives, first degree relatives with history of psychosis, for instance, to take psychedelics. We don't really know, but as a kind of general all-round precaution, those people are advised not to, or they're precluded from taking part in clinical trials, etc. There was some research back in the 60s where they did give people with psychosis psychedelics. We can't really necessarily discern the full scope of that, or how beneficial or how dangerous it was, and there's some mixed reports. In some cases, people like ID Lang would kind of sit there with his clients. He would take LSD with them, and they kind of seemingly had some benefit, but he was a bit of a maverick, for instance. So just as a kind of general precaution, people with first degree relatives with psychosis are screened out. There may be other people as well, people with a high degree of neuroticism, people with OCD, they may not even find it, they may not even be capable of kind of letting go that much to have a psychedelic experience. And there may be other populations that might also be not suited to taking psychedelics, so we don't necessarily know who they are. There hasn't been enough research on it. I mean, the main risks are psychological. There's very few physiological risks from taking classic psychedelics. There's no kind of physiological contraindications generally that we're aware of, although there are some exceptions, of course, like people taking iboga. You can only really take iboga if you have a healthy heart, because it can lead to cardiac problems, and there have been cases of people dying from heart attack from taking iboga, for instance. So there are some exceptions, but most of the risks are psychological, and for those reasons we worry about inducing psychotic reactions. Overall, the general scope of the research suggests that psychedelics don't seemingly induce psychosis in people above and beyond the population threshold, right? So those people have taken psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, are at no greater risk of developing psychiatric problems on the population level, right? When epidemiologically speaking, and in fact, in some indices, such as use of psychiatric medication and inpatient treatment, those people who have taken psilocybin are less likely to need that kind of care. So we don't think psychedelics induce psychosis in a kind of general way, but there may be people who are at greater risk. But we still need more research into what are the risks, really, like specifically. But there are obviously lots of cases of people having psychotic breaks that have been triggered by psychedelic experiences, and we don't necessarily know who those people are.
And of course, those of us in transpersonal psychology remain interested exploring that fine line between psychosis and spiritual or psychedelic experience, because I think the untutored eye might be too hasteful to point to a psychosis when in fact it's a spiritual or psychedelic experience that could be processed quite well with the right kind of support in a non-clinical setting.
All right, so I've been just reading a book recently, and there were some accounts about people who've never tried psychedelics in their lives, but they trained themselves to have lucid dreams. So in the lucid dream, at one point they chose to take psychedelics because they could pretty much influence the dream. And they had a full-blown psychedelic experience in the lucid dream without having one before and without a substance. And then they got very intrigued by that. And then later on, they made the decision in real life to actually try psychedelics, and they had a very similar experience with the one they had in the dream months before without a substance. So do you have any reflections or do you know more about this? Or any thoughts how that's, I mean, I can understand how it's possible, but it's very, very intriguing.
Thanks for that, Mihai. Yeah, I had my own, I think my first ayahuasca experience was actually in a lucid dream. I think I had obviously had a yearning to try it, but was kind of unable to access it. This was last millennium. And when I did, it wasn't exactly the same, but I did have a very psychedelic dream experience. I think that, and it is very possible to have psychedelic experiences in dreams, either of psychedelics you've not tried and also of psychedelics you have tried, perhaps. And I think those experiences are very valid. I think dreaming and lucid dreaming is a deeply royal road to the unconscious as well, of course. And in fact, as in the same way we talked about breath work as being a useful alternative or even adjunct to psychedelics, I think dreaming is too. And I think, as a standard, we should all be monitoring, recording our dreams, practicing lucid dreaming. I think it's a really brilliant practice. And if you did, I mean, as Jung did, he had enough material to go on from his dreams that he said he didn't need to take psychedelics. And I think that there's a truism in there. But I don't think they're necessarily exactly the same as a psychedelic experience. And until you try psychedelics, you can't know for sure if it is the same either. But I would say, dream experiences, unless you're very, very kind of good lucid dreamer, they do tend to be shorter, harder to kind of bring back and remember experiences. I guess the point of psychedelic experiences is it's kind of a bit like having a waking dream, but you're kind of lucid and awake for the whole experience, whereas you have to be a very proficient lucid dreamer to remain lucid all night, although it can be done by all accounts, not that I've ever done it. So I think you have a different quality of experience with psychedelics than with dreams, in any case. But I think lucid dreams are a completely valid way of having any kind of insightful, mythical, symbolic experience, psychedelic or not. But thank you for raising that, Mihai. I think that's a really nice point.
And along those lines, in transpersonal coaching, what we do in the frame of open awareness is we engage in active imagination. And with the channel to the deeper levels of conscious opened through the practice of open awareness, the active imagination becomes very interesting and pertinent, kind of seeding the potentials of occurrences still to unfold in ways that do seem to bear fruit very constructively. So we use this as sort of envisioning the future toward the end of the session. It's in fact the integration stage of a transpersonal coaching session where we're future pacing consciousness into various scenarios with respect to what the client presented. We're doing that in the stage of open awareness, more access to the unconscious and subtle levels. And then we're, through active imagination, seeding these potentialities in future scenarios as a way of bringing the session to a close. So that might, Mihai, relate a little bit to what you're mentioning there. So we don't refer to it as lucid dreaming as such, but I think there is a connection. So we've reached full time. I'd like to thank David first and foremost for your time and your expertise in sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. It's greatly appreciated. I think everybody who's with us in this session knows how to access David. And if you don't, via the Aleph Trust website, where you can find out about David's certificate program in psychedelics. And for those interested in transpersonal coaching, learning how to be of support in pre and post-psychedelic work and in other contexts too, on the same website, you can find out information about the transpersonal coaching psychology program that we offer. So thank you so much, everybody, for your participation, for your valuable inputs and energies. It's been wonderful to engage with you all in this setting today. Go well. Bye for now.